Merry Christmas, everybody. I know it feels like the year has flown by. Well, for some of us, and for others, it feels like it's dragged on forever, depending on what time of the year or what day of the week it is. But for those of you who have listened to this podcast or engaged in our agriculture or extension programs here at the River Valley District, we are grateful for your support throughout this year and helping to make this year a tremendous success. I'm Luke Byers, and you are listening to Gab in the Cab. Now, I know that at this time of the year, sometimes we can get into the mentality of putting our business minds on hiatus until January, but there's a couple of house cleaning items that I wanted to address in today's episode just so that we could clear the air about a few last minute details before the year comes to an end. And today I want to discuss one of the things that we're probably not actively out doing at this time of the year, but need to be making preparations for once springtime comes around and we start hitting the dirt to get some field work in. And that is herbicide applications. Now, for many of you who may read our newsletter or read Grass and Grain or some other public information outlets regarding agriculture and the state of the industry, there's been a little bit of confusion over the past several weeks and months about the status of the private pesticide applicator certification process. So what I'm going to be doing today is walking through basically what's happened over the course of the past 4 to 6 weeks, where we stand in the midst of that changing process, and what we can anticipate going forward after the new year. Now, I know that in a previous episode, we've discussed the changes going about in the administrative process from the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level in response to certain litigations that have been made against them that have made their way to superior courts across the country. And so we know that there's a lot of overhaul in terms of the execution of regulations and statutes at the federal level from the EPA. The changes to the private pesticide applicator certification process is just one of those many changes that is going to be taking place in the near future. So the EPA changed its requirements or updated its requirements, requiring each state to update their certification and training plans to match the requirements from the EPA. So what that means is each state that certifies private pesticide applicators has to modify their training and certification process to meet the criteria that EPA has specified. So, in order to accomplish that, the Kansas State Legislature passed what's called House Bill 2607 earlier this year, and that bill basically says that the process by which herbicide applicators or pesticide applicators get their private applicator certification is going to include some changes that are outlined in the plan that the Kansas Department of Agriculture is rolling out. Now, it probably sounds like a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo coming out of my mouth. Doesn't sound like anything concrete. And that's because right now it's not very concrete. The situation right now is very fluid because there's a lot of talk, a lot of banter, but not a whole lot in the way of hard solutions. Really, the only significant, substantial, or rather I should say substantive changes that we know about are that the EPA are changing its requirements of states and their pesticide certification programs, and the Kansas Department of Agriculture is now following after a Kansas legislature bill that has been passed to change the pesticide applicator certification process. The real big controversy or confusion that's been floating around the state is when the changes go into effect. And this ties into an interesting component of the private applicator certification process that some folks might not necessarily be aware of. So I'll mention it just briefly. So the Kansas Department of Agriculture is the agency in the state that certifies private pesticide applicators. However, the Kansas Department of Agriculture has a memorandum of understanding with K-State Research and Extension to have your local extension office administer the examinations to receive that private pesticide applicator certification. The extension system is the only organization in the state that is able to administer those exams. You can't go to your local co-op, you can't go to the bank, you can't go to your agronomist to take that. You have to take it at the extension office because that's what the memorandum of understanding between the Kansas Department of Agriculture and K-State Research and Extension stipulate. In the past, the way that private applicators would get their certification would be to come into the extension office and take an open book exam of 75 questions using the private pesticide applicator manual to help them complete the test. They would then be graded by the extension agent and signed and sent off to the Kansas Department of Agriculture, where they would certify them and distribute that certification to the applicator. What was coming down the pipe in terms of changes as a result of all this legislative, regulatory changes that are taking all the way up from the EPA down to the KDA, down to the individual level, the changes that were going to be taking place were that open book exam was going to be turning to a closed book exam. So that is probably the biggest, most headline-worthy change that a lot of people were grappling onto. So in order to accomplish the goals stipulated in that memorandum of understanding, the Kansas Department of Agriculture essentially commissions the Integrated Pest Management Office at K-State to kind of make sure that the cooperative extension system is in the loop regarding the new rules and regulations about how those private applicator exams get administered. And because we have a lot of private applicators throughout the state, it was really important at a high priority that people at KDA and IPM and here at the Extension Office were on top of the latest information coming out when it was coming out. The challenge behind that is that when the extension system received information about these rule changes, the original effective date mentioned was that the open book would be changing to a closed book exam on January 1st, 2025. So information went out through multiple outlets to notify people, specifically people that either had upcoming renewals or had been on the fence about getting their private applicator certification and had not yet, to basically put them on alert to let them know that these changes were happening and when they were happening. We here at the River Valley Extension District published an article in our newsletter and with multiple news outlets around the area, notifying people of that exact thing. The difference is now that we are several weeks removed from that initial announcement made to the extension system, Kansas Department of Agriculture is reconsidering the effective date of the rollout of those new rules. To put it bluntly, KDA decided that January 1st was too soon to effectively roll out the changes to the certification process. And this is understandable for a number of reasons. One of them is based on how the exam itself is structured. So if you've ever taken a private applicator exam or you've looked through the book or anything like that, what you'll notice is that a lot of the ways that the questions are structured is designed to be open book in nature. It's designed so that the person taking the exam will draw directly from the manual in order to inform the choices and responses that they make on the exam. If by converting to a closed book exam without changing the nature of the exam at all, and no changes to what the questions entailed or whatnot, would create a unique challenge in drawing material from the manual that they were no longer allowed to see during the exam in order to apply it to the responses on the test. So it's not just that the test would be more challenging, it's that a test that was originally designed with the open book concept in mind would then be converted to a closed book format without taking a closed book concept or conception design of the test into account. So that is believed among many in the extension system to be one of the reasons why KDA is wanting to establish what the new rules and regulations surrounding the entire process of applicator certification is before putting effective dates in terms of how that examination process goes. In short, we still require more information to be hashed out in the legislature and at the executive level, at the state level, in order to determine the best way to proceed with the new requirements for pesticide training. So, what does that mean in the short term? In the short term, it means that on January 1st, 2025, the process for receiving your private pesticide applicator certification is going to be exactly the same as it was on December 31st, 2024. So if an individual is considering getting their certification, they could come in January or February or whenever for an indefinite amount of time and just come in and take the open book exam the same way they would this year. So that's the short term consequences. So rather than January 1st, it's an unknown date of change. The long term change is that that main change to the closed book format of the test is going to come eventually. It's just a matter of when. And so that's why we want all of our producers and applicators to be on standby so that whenever changes from the state level are handed down to the extension system, with whom there's an administrative commission, essentially, we need to make sure that people are aware of when that's going to be taking place. So it's not as if these changes are gone or off the books or redacted. Rather, it's merely a delaying of the rollout until we have more information. So now I just kind of want to summarize what the entirety of the main changes are going to be on the extension side in terms of how we go about certifying individuals, or training people rather, to be certified as private pesticide applicators. So at an indefinite date, these changes to the certification will be going into effect. We already discussed changing from the open book to a closed book exam. Two other options are going to be available eventually whenever it comes to receiving initial private applicator certification. One of them is going to be to attend an in-person training to obtain certification. Typically, these are kind of an all-day event, all working day event, I should say. And that curriculum is going to be developed by the Integrated Pest Management Office at K-State and administered through the extension system across the state. And so that's an alternative to the closed book exam. The other alternative is by completing an online training course on Canvas Pro. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Canvas Pro system, Canvas is basically the system for which students at K-State can network and interface rather with the classes that they are taking at Kansas State University. A course is going to be developed on Canvas to be taken by private applicators as an alternative to either the in-person training session that they might take at a location around the state, or as an alternative to the closed book exam. Now, granted, when these dates go into effect is still indefinite, but to be on the safe side, I would personally still encourage people who have not taken their initial private pesticide applicator exam to contact us at one of our 4 offices around the district to schedule a time to come in and get tested for that, because we don't know how long this process is going to take before the new rules go into effect. It could be 6 months, it could be a year, or it could be something where the federal EPA agency begins to get on the case of the Kansas pesticide training program to try to accelerate the process. We really don't know. And so that's why I would encourage people, if you're thinking about it and you haven't done it, get it done so that you're done sooner rather than later, and you're able to not even necessarily saying that it's going to be easier to do it under this format, but it's going to be a known quantity, is what I'd say about it, is that you know what you're getting into by walking into the current applicator certification process, because this has been the process that we have been administering at the Extension Office for quite some time now. One of the more frequently asked questions about all these changes is whether or not there will be any changes taking place to the renewal process. And the answer currently, as of today, is no. So these changes are only going to be affecting people who have either never received an initial private applicator certification, or B, have received one in the past but have let their essentially let their certification expire. So the expiration window, as many may know, it's a 5-year window after the time you're initially certified to the point where you have to renew. And that renewal card, that's most of the time directly sent to the individual from the Kansas Department of Agriculture Pesticide and Fertilizer Division, notifying you 5 years after the initial receipt of that certification to renew. And that renewal window after those 5 years lasts about a year. And a lot of it has to do with when your birthday falls, but that's kind of getting into the weeds of the subject. But that you have a year-long period after the initial expiration to renew without having to retake the initial test. So as long as you're renewing, this is not going to affect you. And that's information I'm able to say as of today. We don't know if that will necessarily change in the future, but the latest information we have from Kansas Department of Agriculture is that people renewing are not going to be affected by the changes in rules as long as they stay on top of their renewal. If they let that expiration window lapse, so that they're now a year removed from when their certification was effective, they would have to retake the test. And if it has passed the point where the rules are now in effect, they would have to retake a closed book test. But this is all just kind of up in the air, but we're just trying to make sure that we're delivering as much information as possible to you, the grower, to you, the applicator, so that we're covering all of our bases and that no one is blindsided by any changes in rules that are going to be coming down the pike, because we know that they will be coming at some point. Before I kind of wind down and bring this episode to a conclusion, I just wanted to cover a handful of other frequently asked questions about the private pesticide applicator certification itself, what it entails, and distinct qualities that a lot of people might want to have in mind. So one thing to know is that because it is a private pesticide applicator certification, it is private, it is not commercial. What that means is if you have a private certification and not a commercial certification, you cannot sell your services of applying chemical to fields owned or operated by other individuals. In that case, you would have to get a commercial certification, and that process is completely separate. In many cases, those tests are administered at specific locations at specific times, often as a conclusion to a training process for that commercial certification. So that is wholly separate. So if you only have your private certification, you are not legally allowed to sell your service of chemical application to other people. Then another question that we have a lot that comes in is, what is the scope of a private pesticide applicator certification as it pertains to employee applications? So if you are an owner operator or you are an operator of a farm and you have your private applicator license, but you have an employee that does not, legally, they are permitted to apply chemical on your fields or fields that you operate under the umbrella of your applicator certification, as long as they are under the certification holder's supervision, quote unquote. And I'm putting that in air quotes because supervision is kind of a broad term, basically saying that the the certification holder doesn't have to be physically present at the field site of where the application is taking place, but they do have to have an awareness that that application is taking place, and they have to have given instructions to that employee to do so. So you don't have to get a certification for every single employee that works on your farm, but if you are the operator and you have that certification, the liability ultimately comes back to you if the individual, the employee, was applicating in a way that was out of line or was not under the knowledge or supervision of the employer. So that is something to keep in mind. The reason that that might be nice for some employers to have is because if you don't want to have an employee necessarily go through the rigors of reading up on the pesticide application manual and taking the test, which can take several hours, and paying the $25 fee to the Kansas Department of Agriculture, you can just have them essentially working underneath your applicator certification, as long as you're willing to assume the risk associated with if applications from that go awry, because the liability would come back to the certification holder. If that's not a level of liability that you are willing to take on for yourself, you could require that your employees get their own applicator certification so that when they are applying as employees underneath you, they're applying underneath their own certification. We know that across the state of Kansas, pesticide applications are immensely important to crop production. In fact, herbicides are, in particular, are still the most effective means of weed management and weed control in our weed management toolbox. We know that there's other things that can be considered, whether it be cultural or mechanical methods of weed control, but we know that herbicides in particular are still the number one management tool, as they should be, because the science has brought us a long way in terms of what we're able to do through the power of chemistry to control weeds and other undesirable pests that get in the way of successful and profitable farm production. So we understand that this is going to be a hot button issue from now going forward as more information comes out, and we're able to update you on that. So what I'd like to take this time to say is that we welcome any and all feedback from the public, from producers in our area, to contact us with their questions or their concerns, or anything that might be on their mind regarding these new changes that are going to be coming, but will not be occurring January 1st, but they will be coming. Just to contact us, reach out to us, let us know what you're thinking so that we can keep all those different forms of feedback in the back of our minds as that new information continues to roll out. The River Valley Extension District is comprised of Clay, Cloud, Republic, and Washington counties in north central Kansas. We have offices in Clay Center, Concordia, Belleville, and Washington. You can contact me directly at 785-632-5335, and our staff will be able to direct you to me personally, or you can email me at lsbyers@ksu.edu for any questions, concerns, or feedback you may have as this process continues to move forward. Once again, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy, Happy New Year. We're looking forward to hearing from you again soon and speaking with you again soon after the new year gets rolling. You have been listening to Gab in the Cab, our final episode of 2024. Meet us back here again after the first of the year to join us for an all-new season in 2025. We'll see you next time.